Hi, my name is Chris and this is Battle Nonsense. We all know that when a low ping player is in a direct firefight with a high ping player, then strange things will happen, simply because of the time difference or lag between these players. Besides that, there's also the theory that when a high ping player joins the server, then this would cause a latency spike for all the other players who are already on the server. And another theory is that when you have high ping players on the server, then these would cause the hit reg to become unpredictable, even for two low ping players who engage each other in a direct firefight. Now in my previous netcode videos I showed you how long it takes for the player on the receiving end of the gun to see the damage indicator, to get his health value updated, and to see the actual firing animation on the player who shot at him. I performed these tests while both players had low pings, when one player had a high ping, as well as one of the players had packet loss. But I always made these tests on an empty server. The reason for that was that the goal of these tests was to show you what is the best that the netcode can do under perfect conditions. If it fails during this test, then it will also fail on a live server. These tests also allowed me to quickly find out if changes that the developer introduced to the netcode actually changed something, as I could easily compare the test results. But there was always the question of how the netcode performs on a full server. A question that I was not able to answer, as running tests on a full server always ended up in a disaster, because the other players on the server constantly killed the two players that I used for the testing. Now I'm still not able to fill a 64-player server with testers, but with the help of my subscribers and followers I was able to fill a 32-player server and finally do a test under more or less normal conditions, where I tried to confirm a few of those theories that I mentioned earlier. To make the test a bit more exciting, we used a server that ran at a tick rate of 144 Hz, which was meant to attract more people to participate in this test, as well as to generate more server load, as we were just 32 players. So the first thing I did was that I restarted the server and then performed my usual hit reg tests with my two low ping players, which provided me with the reference values. Then I began to let the first 10 players onto the server, which included people who had more than 100 and 250 milliseconds. While these players were joining, I monitored the latency and latency variation of my two low ping players, and I performed my hit reg tests to see how the delay of the damage indicator, health value update and the firing animation respond to these 10 people joining. Once all of these players were on the server, I had them focus just on the C flag and fight there really hard. While they did that, I again monitored the latency and latency variation of my low ping players and performed my delay tests. After some time I then had all players gather at the C flag and then fire at each other on my command. And once they started to fire, I again monitored the latency variation and performed the delay tests. Then all the players had to come very close to my low ping players and fight there, as well as kill each other on my command while I did the monitoring and the delay tests. After that I started to bring in more and more players and we repeated the same tests. So they were fighting around C, then they had to kill each other on my command, and then they had to come close to my two low ping players again and engage each other there. We repeated this procedure until we scaled up the player count to 32 players, which eventually brought down the server frame rate from more than 999 to 288, which is 2 times the tick rate of 144. So after I went through all the data that I collected during that 1-hour test, I found out that when you have high ping players join or leave the server, then this did not increase the latency or latency variation of my low ping players. The presence of high ping players did also not affect the stability of the hit reg delays between my two low ping players, no matter if these high ping players were near the low ping players or out of sight. What the test did show very clearly was that when I increased the player count, then the server FPS started to decrease and the latency variation of my low ping players increased, while the latency and ping did stay pretty much the same. Now the latency variation shows you a percentage value of how much your latency goes up and down. So when I have a latency of 35 milliseconds and then see 20 for the variation, then the latency should change by 7 milliseconds. The strange thing is, however, that more often than not it only changes by less than 0.5 milliseconds, yet I see a latency variation of 40. What I also noticed was that the longer we were playing with 32 players on the server, the lower the server FPS got, and the hit reg delays between the low ping players started to increase. That the server FPS decreases over time is something that I also noticed on the community map server in the CTE. When the round began, we were 32 players on the server and the server FPS were at 500 frames per second. At the end of the round there were still 32 players on the server, but the server FPS decreased to 150. My latency variation also increased from an average of 7 at the beginning of the round to nearly 18 at the end of the round. And my latency increased from 32 milliseconds to 45 milliseconds while my ping did stay the same. So while I don't have any test results for it, I felt that the lower the server frame rate got on the community map server, the more strange Hitreg issues I encountered, and the game began to feel less responsive. Now, I was told that you shouldn't see any problems as long as the server FPS are higher than the Tickrate of the server, which in case of the community map project server in the CTE means 30 Hz. So I don't have any test results for this yet, but based on how the CTE server felt while playing the community map, I think that once the server FPS goes below 200, you start to see more and more strange issues with the Hit Reg, as well as an increased latency variation, and the game starts to feel less responsive. I don't have any info from the developers about this yet, but when we consider that the client can send damage data to the server at the same rate as his frame rate, then I think that 200 would be the minimum for the server FPS, as this is also the default frame rate limit of the clients, and so the maximum rate at which it can send damage. So in this test I could not confirm that when hyping players join the server that this would cause latency spikes for the other players on the server. I could also not confirm the theory that the presence of hyping players affects the hit registration of two low ping players who are in a direct firefight. What I was able to confirm in this test was that the longer the round runs, the lower the server FPS gets. And with the decreasing server FPS, the hit reg delays as well as the latency variation increases. An interesting question is if the amount of hyping players that you have on the server is able to affect the server FPS. And that's then why players say that the hit reg feels worse on a server that has hyping players on it. But it's really hard to test, and it's also very clear that when low ping players fight against hyping players, then this will not end well because of the time difference between these players or the lag between these players. I think that the server FPS value that we have in the network performance graph in the CTE will be one of the most valuable tools to identify why we have problems or strange moments in the game. And that's why I hope that these new performance statistics as well as the other netcode improvements, including the high Tickrate support, will be included in the summer patch so that playing the game in retail becomes less frustrating, as the netcode is definitely better in the CTE and the tools there allow every player on the server to identify why they have a bad time playing on that server. I also hope that Sony can be convinced to allow DiceLA to enable the network performance graph on the PlayStation 4. Otherwise the players on this platform will continue to have a hard time to identify why they get killed too fast or around cover or suffer from another problem. Before I end this video I want to thank my incredible fans one more time. Without your support I would not have been able to do the eye-opening input lag tests on the PC and the Xbox One, to which I linked to in the description. And I would also not have been able to do the delay tests for this video here with the precision required for a server running at 144 Hz. Your support really means a lot to me. If you have any further questions about the topic of this video, then please post them in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed this video, then please give it a like, subscribe for more, and I hope to see you next time. Until then, have a nice day and take care. My name is Chris and this was Battle Nonsense.